This is very bright and very overwhelming, and I'm sure you all expected me to have like massive quads coming out here, but I'm normal, don't worry. I want to start tonight off by asking a question. What would change if we spent as much time glorifying starting lines as we do finish lines? What if we cheered as wildly for people the moment they assumed their position in the starting blocks as we do when they run through the tape at the end of the race? As a person who's crossed numerous finish lines, I'll tell you in advance, my ego and I have a vested interest in the glorification of finish lines. But when I sat down to write this speech, it dawned on me that I wasn't terribly interested in talking about finish lines. It's not that I don't have juicy little tidbits to share with you about how I did what I did. Believe me, I do. In fact, I'm going to encourage you to ask me about them or shoot me an email directly when this is all over. It's just that what I find most interesting about my story and the stories you hear tonight and the stories of anyone who's living with their restraining devices lifted is in many ways the exact opposite of finish lines. What I'm most curious about is starting lines, and to be frank, I believe it's our ability to get to those that prompts doors to swing wide open. I've decided that there's nothing I find more alluring, more seductive, than the sound of a figurative gunshot as it cracks through the air, marking the beginning of a grand adventure. Joseph Campbell, who was arguably the most prominent mythologist of our time, named these gunshots calls to adventure. He defined them as blunders, stumbled upon chances that reveal unsuspected worlds, the idea that something else is out there. In my mind, these are the moments we become capable of shifting from ordinary to extraordinary, from human to hero. And that's what I want to talk about tonight. How do we hear our own calls to adventure? How do we recognize them when they're thrown our way? And how do we know when a starting line is really a starting line? Luke Skywalker was a bored and lonely farm boy when he received a holographic message from a droid. Exactly. Harry Potter was locked in a cupboard under the stairs until the letters began arriving, delivered by a series of owls. Dorothy Gale and her ratty-looking terrier were chilling in Nowhere, Kansas, when a tornado came in and shook things up. These famous characters and many other like them, real or imagined, have one thing in common. Prior to their calls to adventure, they were just generally discontented with life. They weren't living in terror, things weren't broken, life wasn't miserable. But boredom, discontent, and frustration were creeping in. That's sign number one. If your regular life doesn't feel like it fits anymore, if a general dissatisfaction is seeping in through the cracks of the walls you've carefully built around you, pay attention. This is the universe's way of preparing you. It's like getting advanced warning on a pop quiz that involves when, how, and where your life is going to change if you choose to let it. And let me tell you this, being discontent just a little bit is a good enough reason. You don't have to wait until something falls apart or breaks to ask for more, different, better, to say yes to a call to adventure. You might take some heat for it. I took a little, but I don't care. I'd rather be happy than discontent, and I'd rather be totally freaking overjoyed than happy. Next comes the actual call. It can come in many forms. You might hear something, you might see something. You might see a new person, get an interesting email. Mine came in the form of a small blue sign that was dangling on top of a ski lift. Regardless of the variety of the ways that they can come, there's a singular feature you can always count on. Absolutely, unequivocally, your call will be absurd. Now, before I dive any deeper, I want to be clear about one thing. It's easy to confuse absurd with asinine. You got to be careful. When you're drunk with your buddies and someone suggests a feat of strength involving shopping carts and that hill on Taylor Way, you're dancing in the realm of stupidity. But when you're drunk with your buddies and one of them says, "Did you hear about that guy who climbed all 7 summits? Wouldn't it be cool if he skied down it?" That's absurd. It's not lacking in intelligence, but it's clearly unreasonable and highly unlikely. The other thing you can count on is that most calls to adventure won't use shopping carts. The universe doesn't step forward and offer you something mundane. It will offer you something wildly unreasonable. So that's what you should be looking for, something bordering on ridiculous. It's why they call it a divine intervention. And there's 2 reasons for the absurdity. First, if the call was reasonable, logical, it wouldn't classify as an adventure. And secondly, if you already knew how to do it, there wouldn't be any point. There wouldn't be any growth involved. And you know that's what this is about, right? Emotional growth, spiritual growth, growth of any kind. Those are the ingredients required for a starting line. General discontent creates the environment for the gunshot to be heard. And the gunshot itself is the idea that's guaranteed to sit squarely between what you deem to be both impossible and just slightly insane. And I don't know about you, but I think anyone who has the bravery and courage to step forward under those conditions should be applauded. But it's because of those things that our starting lines become easy to ignore. There's no valor to be had if you're the person going out on a limb with hope in one hand and prayer on the other. In fact, oftentimes we shame people who make attempts and fail at that. So most of us don't. We see the starting line and we ignore it. And I'm not saying it's easy. In fact, it's the opposite. Getting to the starting line, saying yes to adventure. It's one of the hardest things a person can do. I've done it multiple times, and to be frank, it's gotten harder each time. But it's worth it, because in my mind, nothing feels better than hearing that gunshot. Nothing feels better than knowing that I've been asked to go after something bigger, and to say yes to something larger than the finish line that's really being used as the bait. So let me leave you with this. What would you change if you shifted your focus? What would change if you stopped looking for finish lines and began looking for starting lines? Thank you.